The use of statistics is going to be very important as we conduct experiments throughout the year, because when you draw a conclusion and when you present your data, you need to have some way to justify that data and show that the data is significant beyond just it looks like it's significant. For example, let's say we took a survey of students at GSMST, and let's say we took a survey of 1,000 students, and we asked those students, do you have a preference for Georgia Tech or the University of Georgia? If preference for school was completely random and there was no other factors that impacted choice, well, we would expect that for Georgia Tech, we would have about 500 people that would pick that school. And then for University of Georgia, you would have 500. Well, let's say we conduct that survey and we end up with 600 people preferring Georgia Tech and 400 people preferring the University of Georgia. Well, what kind of conclusion can we draw? Can we say that there's a preference for Georgia Tech over UGA? Or is that difference small enough that it's just maybe due to random chance and a small sample size? And the way that we would figure that out is by using chi-square analysis. Chi-square analysis can tell us if the difference between our observed and our expected is significant or not. And with chi-square analysis, you can either prove that you have a significant difference or you can fail to prove that you have a significant difference. So let's do an example here. And this example is on the handout that you have, if you can follow along there. And what the problem is this. It's a study. A study is conducted to determine whether men and women are equally likely to have high blood pressure. So a survey is conducted with a group of 10,000 people, 5,000 male and 5,000 female. The results show that 1,000 males have high blood pressure and 800 females have high blood pressure. So if having high blood pressure was due to random chance, you would have expected that out of 1,800 people, 900 males and 900 females would have had high blood pressure. There would have been an equal distribution. What we observed was that 1,000 males had high blood pressure and 800 females have high blood pressure. So the question is this: are males more likely to have high blood pressure than females? Or is that a small enough difference that we just say it's due to random chance? So what you would do here is you would first write down a null hypothesis and identify your null hypothesis. The null hypothesis says basically there is no difference between observed and expected, and that any difference is due to random chance, and there's no impact of gender in this case on the likelihood of having high blood pressure. The hypothesis would be that there is an impact of gender on high blood pressure. So to run a chi-square analysis, you'd set up a table that looks like the one you see here, and you have two rows, one for each class, male, female. What you would expect out of 1,800 people is for 900 to have high blood pressure, 900 males to have high blood pressure, and 900 females. What we observed was 1,000 males and 1,000 females. The next thing that you have to do is complete the formula. There's a formula up on top here that you see, and it's O minus E quantity squared over E. That's observed minus expected squared divided by expected. So for the first row, you'd say 1,000 minus 900, which is 100. You'd square that number and then divide it by 900, and you should get 11.11. On the next row, you do the same thing. You end up with 11.11. You add those numbers together, and what you get is 22.22. That is called your chi-square value. Basically, what that value does is it's a summary number of the difference between observed and expected. And if the difference between the observed and expected is summarized by this number 22.22, then all we have left to do is decide, is 22.22 a large enough number that it's considered significant, or is it small enough that we can say it's really small and the difference was just due to random chance? So the next thing you have to do to solve this is identify your degrees of freedom and your critical value. The degrees of freedom is always equal to the number of classes minus 1. So if we have 2 classes, 2 minus 1 is 1. So your degrees of freedom is 1. Your critical value, you have to go to a table in order to identify, and that will always be provided for you. And here's our table. And you will see on the left-hand column we have the degrees of freedom. Across the top are these decimal numbers. These are known as p-values. We will be operating, unless you're told otherwise, using a p-value of 0.05. Basically what this says is that if we find a significant difference, we are at least 95% certain there's a significant difference, because 1 minus 0.05 is 0.95. You find where your degrees of freedom intersect with your p-value, and in this case, if we have 1 degree of freedom and a p-value of 0.05, our critical value is 3.84. So 3.84 is that cutoff between a large difference and a small difference, or what we would say is a significant difference, or failing to prove a significant difference. So critical value of 3.84 is less than 22.22. That tells us that we have a significant difference because the chi-square value is larger than 3.84. So we would reject the null hypothesis, and we would say there is a significant difference between observed and expected. We are at least 95% certain that gender does impact the likelihood of having high blood pressure, and the difference is not due to random chance. So this is how we would do a chi-square analysis, and if you look at your handout, there's an example here dealing with the kingfishers. And the kingfisher is a type of fish that eats guppies, and guppies can be of various colors. So we determined a study to see if kingfishers prefer a certain color or not. And there was a pond set up in a controlled environment, and there were 1,000 guppies in the pond in equal proportions of red, blue, green, or orange. And what we see at the end of the experiment is that 200 guppies were eaten. 65 red, 45 blue, 50 green, and 40 orange. So the question is this: are the numbers close enough to say there's no significant difference, meaning the kingfishers don't have a preference for one color or the other? Or can we say that the kingfishers do have a preference for the red since more reds were eaten? We can't just look at the data and take our best guess. We have to use statistics to figure this out. So you first identify a null hypothesis and a hypothesis. Your null hypothesis says there is no effect of body color on the likelihood that a guppy will be eaten by a kingfisher. Basically, there's no significant difference between observed and expected. Your alternate hypothesis up here would just say that there is a significant difference between observed and expected, and that color does have an impact on whether a guppy is eaten or not. So if you will go ahead, you can pause this if you'd like, and fill in the table here based on the data that you were provided and based on what you would have expected. Also identify your degrees of freedom and your critical value. Once you've done this, you can unpause the recording and you can see what the solution looks like. So for this data, we've identified degrees of freedom of 3 because 4 minus 1 is 3. And then you went to your critical values table. And on the critical values table, where 3 intersects 0.05, you get 7.81. So that's going to be your critical value. Critical value is 7.81. The chi-square value is 7.0. The chi-square value is less than the critical value. And remember, the critical value is that cutoff between a large difference and a small difference, between a significant difference or failing to prove a significant difference. So because the chi-square value is less than the critical value, we failed to prove there's a significant difference between observed and expected. Be real careful here. We did not prove that there wasn't a significant difference. You don't do that with chi-square, but you fail to prove there's a significant difference. So then we would accept the null hypothesis that in the end there was not a preference for one color over the other. Here's another example: 62 red, 59 blue, 40 green, and 39 orange. So like we did before, go ahead and pause the recording and work this one out and decide, is there a preference for one color over the other? Once we completed this chi-square table, you can see that the chi-square value is 8.92. This time the chi-square value is greater than the critical value. 8.92 is greater than 7.81. That tells us we do have a significant difference because the chi-square value is greater than that cutoff that we set. And because it's greater and because p equals 0.05, we can say that we are at least 95% certain there's a significant difference between observed and expected. That means that the kingfishers are not preying on guppies randomly, it means certain colors are preferred over the other. It looks like red is preferred, but we'd probably have to go back and do some more studies to say, okay, red versus blue, which one is preferred over the other? Maybe they're equally preferred. So it would take some more research and experimentation to decide for a fact that red is preferred over the other colors. Here's your last example, and in this example, ignore the title. This is actually practice number 4 on your handout, where you conduct a survey on 1,000 individuals to look at their color preference. So this is color preference and not ecology anymore. And we asked them if they prefer red, blue, green, or orange. In this case, you're given an expected percentage. That comes up sometimes, so I wanted to throw that in there. But when you're doing chi-squared analysis, you can't work directly with the percentage. You have to convert it to a frequency. So if we're dealing with 1,000 individuals, and we would expect an even distribution in terms of color choice, then make a column for expected frequency. And you would expect 250 people to pick red, 250 to pick blue, green, and orange, if color preference were just due to random chance. What we observed in this population was that it looks like the most people picked green, 268. The fewest people picked orange, 236. And we have to decide if the difference between observed and expected is small enough that it's just due to random chance, or is there a significant difference, and is there something that's affecting color preference among this group of people. So go ahead and pause the recording and work this one out. Figure out your chi-square value, your degrees of freedom, your critical value. I want you to write a null hypothesis, and then decide if we will accept or reject the null hypothesis, and then unpause it and you can see the answer. In the end, the chi-square value ends up being 2.504 with a critical value of 7.81. The chi-square value is less than the critical value, so we fail to prove there's a significant difference, and we would accept the null hypothesis, and we would say here that we have failed to find any preference for one color over the other, and that any difference is most likely due to random chance.